Chapter 1-1 Pentagonist. Morning, Shirou. A voice called out, the redhead looking up from the stove as his caretaker strolled into the room, dressed, as always, in his usual grey yukata with Hayori. You're up early. Morning, Azazel-san. Shirou replied, the redhead, now clad in a school uniform, not taking his eyes off the stove, more out of a desire to avoid looking at the man than concern for the food. Breakfast will be ready in just a bit, so have a seat. If only Violet was as well-mannered. Azazel chuckled, suppressing a yawn as he shuffled over to the table, picking up the morning paper while Shirou turned his attention back to the stove with a sigh. It had been 6 months since Shirou had awoken in a private hospital run by one of Azazel's numerous subordinates, the man having brought him there when he'd stumbled across him lying half dead in the gutter. Despite the faker's concerns, the man hadn't asked too many pertinent questions, which was good, as Shirou doubted he'd be able to answer them. Fortunately, there was no need to lie to preserve secrecy of magecraft, as one of the few questions the man asked was how he'd come to possess a holy shroud. At first, Shirou assumed he was speaking to an executor of the Holy Church, as only members of the burial division would recognize the Shroud of Martin for what it was. When he'd posed the question, however, Azazel had merely laughed at him. That, and the fact the man clearly wasn't human, had reassured the faker that he wasn't about to be made an example of. Not that the man's inhumanity meant anything to the faker. After rubbing elbows with counter-guardians, demigods and the personification of all the world's evil, whatever Azazel was, at the very least he hadn't tried drinking his blood or strapping him to a dissection table. Oh, make no mistake, there was no denying the man was powerful. Even slouched over like he was, casually reading the morning paper while dressed in a yukata and Hayori, he radiated prana like an active noble phantasm, and Shirou didn't doubt for a second he was holding back. The man's species aside, Shirou was more concerned with how he'd gotten from the caverns beneath Fuyuki City to a street in Kuaha City, a sentiment seemingly shared by Azazel, who went out of his way try and contact Fujimura Taiga, Shirou's guardian in Fuyuki, to verify the redhead's claims, only to drop another bombshell on the boy. There was no Fujimura Taiga. There was no Old Man Reiga, no Fujimura Group. Even the staff at Homurahara had never heard of an Emiya Shirou, and a call to the hospital shot down any hopes of him being listed as a survivor of the fire, the reason being that there never was one. There never was a Holy Grail war, the Ainsburn never teamed up with the Tosaka and Mata to recreate the heavens feel, and so the being known as Emiya Shirou was never born. Faced with the reality of being stranded in a world where, for all intents and purposes, he did not exist, Shirou naturally went into shock, until Azazel spoke the words that had rocked him to his core. So kid, you wanna come with me? And so, for the second time in his life, Shirou found himself in the care of a shady, middle-aged man that, by all rights, should not have been able to just walk out the door with him, no doubt using whatever influence he possessed, material and otherwise, to have papers made in Shirou's name, including a birth certificate, passport, and even a hanko for any official documentation he may receive in the future. The similarities to Kiritsugu didn't stop there either. Indeed, there were times when it physically hurt Shirou to be around the Azazel, though thankfully they were few and far between. One of the key differences between them, other than the fact that Azazel was clearly a foreign non-human obsessed with local culture, was that his slothful nature stemmed from his laid-back attitude rather than a curse slowly eating away at his body. Not only that, while Kiritsugu could be kind of a drag, Azazel was almost disturbingly likable, always obsessed with the newest thing on the market. It's almost like he's the bastard child of Kiritsugu and Fujine. He mused, chuckling as he set the food on the table, recalling his guardian's childhood crush on his father, and how they'd both compete for the man's attention. Perfect as always, Shirou. Azazel complimented, his eyes dancing as he eagerly dug into the humble, in Shirou's opinion, breakfast. I swear your cooking could lead a saint to sin. You're exaggerating. Shirou scoffed, the two of them continuing to dine in comfortably relative silence before he noticed the man suppressing a yawn. Were you working late last night? Ah, one of my cute subordinates passed away some time ago. Azazel sighed, his good humor vanishing, replaced with a grim frown. And to top it all off, it turns out the reason behind it was due to them running around carrying out errands for another one who's been scurrying around my back for some time now. He took a sip of miso soup. It hasn't gotten to the point I need to step in personally, but if he keeps this up I may need to have him cool his heels for a bit. Shirou shivered but said nothing, more than used to such conversations after a lifetime accompanying Fujimura Reiga whenever the old man had desired some company. You didn't associate with the head of a yakuza group, or cohabit with the man's granddaughter, without learning to filter certain troubling turns of phrase. Shouldn't you be heading out? Azazel wondered, glancing up at the wall-mounted clock for emphasis. Shirou's eyes widening in alarm as he realized he was running late. Don't worry about the dishes, I'll sort them out. In that case, I'll be off. Shirou conceded, rising from his seat, making certain to pick up his packed lunch from the fridge before heading on his way, Aazelle turning on the television just as the faker shut the door behind him. For the first month or so since awakening in this new world, Shirou had done nothing but try to determine just how much it differed from his own. To his relief, the two were almost eerily similar, possessing similar histories and events that had led to the formation of modern society, so it wasn't as if he had to deal with any culture shock on the mundane front. The magical side of things, however, was a completely different story, evidenced by the first time he'd tried activating his circuits, only to almost kill himself as the ambient mana surged into his body, forcing him to trace several blades in order to avoid death by prana overload. It was a good thing he'd had the foresight to keep Archer's arm wrapped up, otherwise he was fairly certain the damn thing would have devoured him on the spot. As it were, however, that brief experiment had made it very clear to Shirou that either the laws of magic were different in this world, or Jia's influence wasn't as strong. Personally, Shirou was aiming towards the latter, due to the fact that, despite some time passing from his rushed trace, the traced blades hadn't disappeared until he'd consciously ordered them to do so, leaving only one to monitor in his room until it finally disappeared a few days later. He wouldn't be able to confirm his suspicions until he came in contact with this world's equivalent of the association, but from what little he'd managed to observe, and the presence of various non-human entities he'd sensed wandering around town, Shirou had soon concluded that, as bizarre as it sounded, this world's age of the gods had yet to end, and indeed had persisted to the modern era. For less experienced magi, such a thing would have been seen as a dream come true, a chance for them to take their research to new heights, and perhaps even achieve their clan's goal of reaching the Akashic record. For Shirou, who had experienced firsthand the power of those who lived through the age of gods, it was a daunting prospect. Still, all work and no play made Aazelle bored, and so, despite Shirou's wishes to the contrary, his inhuman guardian had enrolled him at a local high school in the hopes of preventing him from missing out on his rosy high school life. This, more than anything, proved beyond a doubt in Shirou's mind that whatever else Aazelle may be, he had to be somehow related to Taiga, as she was the only person capable of saying something so corny with a straight face. And so, despite his protests and countless hurled objects of a sharp, pointy variety, Shirou found himself walking through the gates of the prestigious Kuaha Academy 3 months later as a second-year transfer from Fuiuki City. Ominous name and decidedly Western-themed architecture aside, the school wasn't all that different from Homurahara. Indeed, Shirou soon found himself drawing parallels with his alma mater to the point he found himself looking for familiar faces in the hallways, only to hurriedly avert his eyes in order to be mistaken as a creeper by the multitude of young women that filled them. That was one area where Kuaha differed from Homurahara, as at its founding it had been a prestigious all-girls school, famous for catering to the educational needs of exceptional, both in terms of looks and academics, young women. The academy had stood the test of time for generations, refusing to open the gates to male students until fairly recently, when the director, for reasons Shirou had yet to find a valid explanation for, had decided to make the school co-ed, allowing boys to enroll for the first time in generations. No one was entirely certain just what had affected this change in policy. It certainly wasn't due to lack of funds, nor was it acceptance rates. Indeed, the entry requirements for Kuaha had actually been lowered in order to improve the male turnout for the year, which Shirou was ashamed to admit was probably the only reason Aazelle had managed to enroll him, given his lack of school documents. In order to compensate for this, despite Aazelle assuring him that his tuition was paid in full, Shirou had fallen into his old role as fake janitor, helping out the various clubs and faculty members where needed, never asking for anything in return. Needless to say, this quickly endeared him to most of the seniors and staff members, earning him the slightly more flattering nickname of Handyman Amiya and, more embarrassingly, the Kuaha Brownie. It also brought him to the attention of the student council, a prospect that was both refreshing, in that the president reminded him a lot of his friend Ryudo Issei, and concerning, as she, and the entire council for that matter, not only weren't human, but from their scent were an entirely different species from Aazelle. Fortunately, much like his caretaker, they seemed content to masquerade as ordinary humans, so for the moment he'd kept his apprehensions to himself. It certainly didn't hurt that the scent of Sana and her clique didn't send him racing for the hills, unlike a certain red-headed senpai that seemed determined to speak with him for some reason these last few months. Kuaha Academy, Student Council Office. Okay, Shirou grunted, his ochre eyes narrowing in concentration as he examined the mess of wires before him, a screwdriver gripped in his free hand. I think I see what the problem is. Sorry to bother you with this, Amiya-kun. Shidori Sana offered, the reserved president looking up from her paperwork to see what the redhead was doing over the rim of her glasses. This is the third time it's broken down this month, Kaiku. Meguri Tomo groaned, the secretary glaring at the offending heater. We really should call in a repairman. We wouldn't be able to even if there was room left in the budget. Ruriko sighed dejectedly, the treasurer slumping morosely across her desk. Kaiku already allocated the budgets for this semester, so there's nothing we can do. We wouldn't have to do anything if the last caretaker hadn't been caught hiding cameras in the girls' locker rooms. Shinra Tsubaki opined, the vice president's heterochromatic eyes flashing in silent anger at the recollection. Honestly, how a pervert like that managed to slip through the cracks for so long is beyond me. You mean like how the perverted trio are still running rampant? Tomo teased, earning a frown from the older girl. Honestly, I'm surprised Kaiku didn't have them expelled from the start. A sentiment Shirou, and most of the female student body, agreed with, given what little interaction he'd had with the trio of idiots that were unanimously reviled by pretty much every decent human being on campus, staff, and student alike. One of the many downsides of the lowered entry requirements that had quickly raised its ugly head was the fact that, out of the comparatively small handful of male students that managed to pass the exam and earn a place within the hallowed halls of Kuaha, there existed a sizable number who had only done so because of Kuaha's reputation for housing babes. Case in point, the perverted trio, a trifecta of stupidity composed of Matsuda the perverted paparazzi, Motohama the three-size scouter, and Hyudo Issei, the self-proclaimed harem king. Somehow, despite all logic, the three of them had managed to garner over 30 detentions and a suspension apiece within the first month of enrollment for peeking and taking illicit photos, though thankfully they hadn't seen fit to try anything of a more physical nature. A good thing too, otherwise Shirou wouldn't have been the only one with something to say. Nor did he doubt for a second that he wouldn't be the only one letting his fists do the talking. Some might find this a surprisingly harsh opinion, especially anyone who'd known Shirou in his past life. And truth be told, if the trio showed any remorse for their actions, he might not have held them in such low regard. But no, not only did the Three Stooges refuse to show remorse for their actions, they honestly believed it was their God-given right to violate their classmates' basic human rights to satisfy their base urges. Even putting aside what he'd learned of Sakura's upbringing, Shirou had never been the sort to avert his eyes from wrongdoing, and it didn't get worse than sexually harassing someone. He therefore felt wholly justified about breaking Issei's nose when the little shit had invited him to join us in the search for appointment. Hell, he hadn't even gotten a detention for it. If anything, it had only served to improve his own reputation among the staff and student body, to say nothing of Sana's opinion of him. Tomo, Tsubaki, that's enough. Sana intervened, silencing her fellow council members with a stern look before turning to regard Shirou. Well then, Amiya-kun, can it be fixed? Shirou confirmed with a nod, subtly adding the finishing touches to the heater before closing his circuits. I'd still recommend getting someone to give this a proper look over if you're not going to replace it. As it stands, this is a temporary fix at best. I'll see about making arrangements before the winter term rolls around. Sana mused offhandedly, gesturing towards Tsubaki, who diligently made a note of the issue for their next meeting with the faculty. Thank you for your efforts, Amiya-kun. Rest assured, you shall be compensated for your assistance. There's no need for that. Shirou countered hurriedly, hoping to dissuade her before things turned into an argument, only to flinch as Sana adjusted her glasses pointedly. Amiya-kun, she cut in, her tone all too similar to Rin's whenever the elder Tosaka sibling felt the need to point out why Shirou was an idiot. While your generosity is to be commended, I cannot in good faith allow you to walk out that door without some form of reimbursement for your time. Not only would it reflect badly on the student council, it would mark you as a patsy for anyone looking to shirk their duties. I understand, Shidori Kaiku. Shirou sighed, rubbing the back of his head absent-mindedly. I just don't like the idea that I'm getting paid for something I did on a whim. As expected of Kuaha Academy's brownie. Gen Shirou Saji chortled, the sole male council member smirking at the redhead from the side. Truly, you're a credit to us all. Didn't Gen-chan also take advantage of Amiya-kun though? Tomo opined, heedless of her colleague's look of alarm. After all, weren't you supposed to fix the heater last week? Saji. Sana intoned, the boy in question freezing before slowly turning to face the bespectacled president, only to flinch as her glasses ominously reflected the light of the room. Is this true? I think I'd better leave. Shirou opined, wincing as the scent of Sana's power, which had been permeating the room, slowly increased, the faker wishing Saji all the luck in the world as he made for the door, only to freeze as a familiar, intimidating scent hit him right in the face. It wasn't a bad smell by any means. Indeed, it carried the sweet undertone of honey that Sana and the rest of the council, Sensaji, gave off. However, unlike Sana, whose power smelled like running water, this scent had every fiber of his being screaming at him to run like his life depended on it. The last time he'd smelled something like this, he'd been facing off against Gilgamesh before the Greater Grail, the corrupted vessel on the verge of giving birth to all the world's evil. It was therefore rather off-putting that the owner of the scent possessed such a friendly smile. Ah! Amiya-kun. The tall, buxom redhead greeted, her blue-green eyes brightening cheerfully at the sight of him, a sentiment shared by her dark-haired companion, though her smile carried a hint of mischief. Good afternoon. Shutting the door in her face and locking it for good measure, Shirou proceeded to ignore her surprised exclamations and the bemused looks of the student council as he calmly crossed the room to a window, which he proceeded to open and climb out of, pausing only to shut it behind him before turning on his heel and sprinting off into the distance. Well. Tsubaki mused, unable to hide her amusement as Saji seized the opportunity to escape Sana's sight by rushing to open the locked door. That happened. Indeed. Sana mused, torn between her disapproval of Shirou's behavior and her amusement at the look on her rival's face as Saji showed her in. Good afternoon, Rias, Akeno. Good afternoon, Sana. The Gremory heiress returned the greeting, her queen, Himejima Akeno smiling as she inclined her head. It was that Emi-yakun earlier. You just missed him. Sana supplied, gesturing to the windows for emphasis, hiding her amusement at her friend's ensuing pout behind a disapproving frown. Was there something you needed him for? Not really. Rias sighed, shaking her head in exasperated disappointment. I'd just like to know why he always tries to run away whenever I try to talk to him. Maybe you did something so terrible to him in the past he developed a fear for you. Akeno opined, not even trying to hide her amusement at the maybe he drummed up the courage to ask you out, only for you to carelessly trample over his feelings when you rejected him. Akeno. Rias chided, flushing at her queen's imagination. Stop making me sound like the villain in a bad soap opera, she huffed crossly. Besides, I honestly can't recall ever meeting him before. I wouldn't be surprised, considering he only enrolled at the academy this year. Sana opined, accepting a folder from Tsubaki. Shirou's picture attacked to the front page. He transferred from Homurahara in Fuyaki City, but was forced to repeat a year to make up for his lackluster marks. So he's technically a third year, Kaiku. Ruriko noted brightly, earning a troubled look from Saji. You'd better get him something nice as thanks for fixing the heater, Gen-chan. So the brownie of Kuaha strikes again. I see. Akeno mused, ignoring Saji's splutters in favor of the aforementioned heater as Rias ran her fingers over it as if testing for dust. Well. There's no doubt about it. Rias confirmed, her expression unreadable as she drew her hand back and turned to face Sana. It's faint, almost non-existent really, but I can detect some traces of the same magical signature we've been sensing on and off around campus the past few months. I see. Sana mused, her expression just as unreadable as Rias as she adjusted her glasses in thought. I had my suspicions, but I never would have imagined a magician would be so daring as to sneak into our territory, especially given recent events. You think he could have been affiliated with Raineray's group? Rias pondered, crossing her arms beneath her considerable bust. Much to Sana's irritation, it would certainly explain his wariness around me, and not all of her accomplices were accounted for, Fried Selzen being a prime example. Possible. Sana mused, shivering slightly at the mention of the insane exorcist. Though from what little we know, it seems Selzen hates magicians just as much as devils, so it's unlikely Emi-yakun would have had any involvement with him. Could he simply have moved here without knowing this territory was under the protection of the Gremory and Citrai clans? Raya suggested. I mean, none of the residual magic we've sensed around campus has been remotely offensive, right? True. He only seems to use it to gain a better understanding of the inner workings of the machines he repairs. Tsubaki opined as she adjusted her glasses. In cases where the magic lingers, it seems to be strengthening faulty components until such time they can be replaced. It would seem his reputation as a brownie is well deserved after all. Akeno mused, licking her fingers with a sultry smile. I can only wonder what secrets he may be hiding. Sana said nothing, more than familiar with the antics of her friend's queen, even if she shared her thoughts on the matter. No matter how highly the staff and student body spoke of him, no matter how well-intentioned his actions may be, the fact remained that Emiya Shirou was an unknown magician that had somehow managed to slip under their radar in the wake of the Twilight Healing incident. True, Rias Occult Research Club had resolved the issue swiftly, garnering the Gremory 2 valuable new addition to her peerage in the process, but it didn't change the fact that, somehow, no less than 4 fallen angels and a squad of stray exorcists had managed to sneak into their territory. Such a slip-up could be fatal in the future. Hell, it had cost Rias' new peerage members their mortal lives, so it was only understandable that, even if it turned out he wasn't a threat, Sana wouldn't rest till she learned just what rock Emiya Shirou had crawled out from under. For now, I propose we merely adopt a wait-and-see approach. She suggested, Rias nodding her head in agreement. If it turns out he's simply ignorant, we may consider approaching him. Her glasses flashed ominously should his intentions be less than noble, however. Her implication was clear, though Sana was surprised to note quite a few people in the room seemed troubled by the prospect of having to kill Emiya Shirou. Herself included. Kuaha City, after hours. I'm heading off, master. Shirou called out, the faker waving in passing to the owner of Aazelle's favorite bar, where he worked part-time in order to earn some spending money. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care, kid, the mustachioed owner called out, nodding his head from the bar, where he was dutifully cleaning a glass with a clean rag. Tell Az to stop on by sometime, will ya? I will. Shirou called out, stepping out of the bar only to curse as he found himself standing in a rainstorm, the faker holding his book bag over his head as he raced for the nearest shelter. Of all the times to forget an umbrella. He muttered, part of him considering using projection to trace one, only to scoff at the idea moments later, imaging the look on Rin's face at such a use for his one skill, his good mood souring instantly at the memory of his first true mentor in magecraft. Where did it all go so wrong, he wondered, gazing up at the cloudy sky, part of him wishing it would wash his memories away, just like it had that day Kiritsugu had pulled him out of the fire. If he closed his eyes, he could still see them, see the faces of the people he'd vowed, and failed, to save, from Saber, who had vowed to fight on his side only to die with his dagger in her chest, to Sakura, poor, beautiful, broken Sakura, who had tearfully voiced her love for him as he cleaved her head from her shoulders. He remembered Shinji's terrified screams and Kotoman's mocking praises. He recalled Lancer's feral grin, Archer's judging gaze. He'd lost count of the times the memory of Berserker's mad howl had shaken him from his fitful slumber. And most of all, he remembered Ilya's sad smile as she lay dying in his arms. He'd cast aside his dreams for her, forsworn the borrowed ideals of a hero of justice, sacrificed friend, foe and even his left arm, all for the sake of preserving the smile of a sister he'd never known, who had spent her entire life hating him for a crime he'd never knowingly committed. It hadn't been enough, after everything he'd sacrificed, it hadn't been enough to save the one person he'd wanted to save above all else. He recalled snapping, unleashing all the grief, all the anger, all the resentment he had on the Golden King that stood in his way, wordlessly voicing his denouncement of such a world with each blow. It could not have been called a wish, he had been in no state to coherently voice such a thing, but the sheer fervor with which he denied the world around him struck a chord with the taint at the core of the Greater Grail, giving it all the incentive it needed to manifest a wish. He had denounced the world that had crushed his dreams, so Angram Mania sent him to a new one. A pained cry snapped him out of his thoughts, quickly followed by the familiar sound of live steel digging into flesh. As if on autopilot, he found himself racing through the rain, urged on by the fading cries for help, pulling up short just as he reached the scent of blood, his eyes narrowing as he peered around the corner. Lying face down in a growing pool of blood was a priest, the back of his vestments laced with numerous cuts. Standing over the man was another, younger priest, this one wearing a black overcoat and a crazed expression as he leered at a blonde youth in a Kuaha Academy uniform sans the blazer. "You who?" the grey-haired priest called out, his features crazed and mocking as he smiled at the blonde teen. "It's been a while, hasn't it? Did you miss me? Prince shit of the shitty devils. Freed Selzen dash." The blonde spat, Shirou's eyes widening as he recognized Kiba Ueto, the unofficial prince of Kuaha Academy, and one of several non-humans he'd seen associating with she who must be avoided. "What rock have you been hiding under all this time? It must be fate," the priest, Freed, crooned, his voice sending shivers of disgust up Shirou's spine as he gyrated perversely. "I can't help but shed a tear at such a joyous reunion. Unfortunately for you, I'm not in the mood for any of your bad jokes." Kiba muttered, Shirou's eyes widening as a magic circle appeared before the blonde, a sword manifesting itself in his hands. "That's perfect." Freed cackled, waving his own sword overhead, the blade lighting up with a golden aura even as he leered at the blonde. "I was getting bored just running around killing priests." "That light dash!" Kiba exclaimed, his handsome features twisting in a mixture of alarm and utter loathing as he gaped at the weapon in the deranged priest's hands. "That aura, it can't be dash." "Oh, but it can." Freed countered with a sneer. "Nice timing. As penance for your previous actions against my noble self, let's see which is stronger, your piece of shit demon sword, or my holy blade, Excalibur." The sky was crying. And I'll end it there for now. As you can guess, this isn't the usual Shirou thrown into the DxD verse FIC. No, this one follows how I'd perceive a bad end, for the legendary lost Ilyarut to go. And considering most of Ilya's route was absorbed into Sakura's, it makes sense that Shirou would come out of it with Archer's arm. Now, let me get some things out of the way. First. No. Shirou will not be joining a peerage. It's been done to death by people with a lot more talent than myself and I have nothing against it, but for this story Shirou will remain 100% human, or as human as a man made out of swords can be. Secondly. Shirou won't be spamming noble phantasms. Even UBW Shirou couldn't do that without Rin's help, and this one has Archer's arm latched onto him. At the very best he can trace simple weapons, but other than Kanshou and Bakia anything else will require the use of the artificial phantasm. Thirdly. As you might have surmised, things got pretty foobar this route. I'll go into more detail as time goes on, but let's just say Shirou's choices had huge consequences, as expected of a protagonist. Needless to say, those consequences have made Shirou different from his canonical self somewhat and so explain any deviations from character. Fourthly. There will be considerable changes. Normally I'm not one to rock the boat, but in the wake of the aforementioned catastrophe I've decided to live a little and have altered certain events, as would be expected of throwing a wrench as considerable as Emiya Shirou into the works. No spoilers, but let's just say bitch is gonna die. So friends, don't forget Power Stone, thank you. Unfortunately for you, I'm not in the mood for any of your bad jokes. The youth known as Kiba Ueto muttered, Shirou's eyes widening as a magic circle appeared before the blonde, a sword manifesting itself in his hands. That's perfect, the clearly insane priest, Fried Selzen, cackled, waving his own weapon overhead, the rest of their conversation fading from Shirou's consciousness, the very fall of the rain against his skin halting as the faker's eyes locked onto the two blades, scanning them, taking in every minute detail of their existence. In the back of his mind, impossibly large gears ground into action, the sound of forging iron echoing in their wake as the blade works welcomed two more additions to his inner world. Judging the concept of creation. It was a demon sword, born from its master's desire to consume holy energy. It was but a part of the whole, a mere fraction of the original, broken and remade by mortal hands. Hypothesizing the basic structure. A two-handed longsword, designed to overpower foes yet allowing for high-speed movement. Its basic shape resembled a long kris, a light, one-handed longsword designed for swift strikes. Duplicating the composite materials. While not forged by mortal hands, the base metals were identical to that of a regular sword. While divine metal served as its core, base metals had been added to give the shards new life. Imitating the production process. No hand had ever forged this blade. It had been born from its master's will-made form. Originally forged by divine hands, it was restored through the use of alchemy and blessed metals. Sympathizing with the experience of its growth. Countless times this blade was redesigned, reforged, until it had assumed its current form. Few possessed the qualifications for it to acknowledge them as master, and so few had wielded it. Reproducing the accumulated years. While the blade itself was fairly young, it had stood by its master's side longer than any other. It was old, it was new, its current form mere decades old, its legend reaching back centuries. Excelling every manufacturing process. Its name is Holy Eraser, and it would defend its master by devouring the accursed light that shunned him, submerging those who wielded it in eternal darkness. Forged anew, it stands ready to cleave apart the darkness, to bring the light of God down upon the damned. Though reduced from days of yore, all who aspire to glory know its name, the greatest of holy swords. Excalibur. Shirou breathed alongside Fried's crowing, the faker's eyes widening in disbelief, unable to comprehend the sheer blasphemy of the sight before him. Excalibur was no mere sword, it was a divine construct, the pinnacle of holy swords, a last phantasm, forged by the planet itself as the crystallization of mankind's prayer for victory. Guarded by fairies, it had been entrusted solely to the hands of the proud once and future King of Knights by the Lady of the Lake, who reclaimed it following his death. It was Saber's most iconic noble phantasm, the very symbol of her legend, so closely tied to her true identity that she'd been forced to conceal it beneath a sheath of wind, for all who laid eyes upon the sword of promised victory instantly knew its name, and through it the one king deemed worthy to carry the dreams and pride of every warrior, past, present and future who laid eyes upon it. It was not something that could be broken and reforged so easily. To even imagine something strong enough to shatter the sword of promised victory, which by its very name signified that it could not be beaten, was blasphemous. How then, could the sword before him exist? Even if he chose to close his eyes and block his ears, his inner world, that beautiful, haunting field of unlimited blades beneath a cog-filled sky, had burned its existence into his very soul. It was not Excalibur, and yet there was no way it could not be. It was but a portion of the whole, a fragment, an echo, an offshoot that had garnered a tale of its own through the actions of humans. Much like how Caliban was descended from Gram, which in turn was descended from Merodach, so too had this sword seemingly descended from the sword of promised victory. Its name was Excalibur, rapidly, the holy sword of heavenly flash. And it did not appreciate being wielded by a heretic like Fried Selzen. The sound of clashing steel snapped the faker out of his thoughts, blinking just in time to see the two swordsmen lock blades, holy sword and demon sword struggling against one another. You know, your shitty face is getting even more messed up. Fried sneered, his tone smug, a stark contrast to the look of fury on Kiba's normally smiling features. It's starting to look like it was made to be the prey of this holy sword, Excalibur. Shut up! Kiba snarled, forcing the priest back before raising holy eraser before him, tendrils of darkness erupting from the demon sword to envelop its foe as he called out its name, only to be rent asunder by the holy aura coating the blade. Yeah, sorry. Fried sneered mockingly, the insane priest looking hardly apologetic at all as he straightened up once the light faded away. That little trick's not gonna work this time, shithead. I'd be insulted if it did. Kiba shot back, his tone equally smug even as he trembled with repressed rage. That was just a test to make sure you weren't talking out your ass. He readied his sword with a glare. Now that I know that's the real thing, I won't hesitate to break you and your sword. Whoa there! Fried exclaimed, backing up hurriedly whilst fending off Kiba's assault. For a moment, it actually looked like the blonde was pushing him, his demon sword coming round in a two-handed swing that by all rights should have severed the priest's wrist from his arm, only for Fried to sneer mockingly, somehow managing to lean back to avoid the swing, delivering one of his own even as Kiba struggled to right himself, the blonde crying out in agony as dark smoke burst from the resulting wound to his upper arm, dropping to his knees with a grimace. Ah, what's wrong? Fried sneered, his tone mocking as he towered over the downed blonde, the so-called Excalibur resting on his shoulder. Don't tell me you forgot? This sword was made for the sole purpose of killing piece of shit devils like yourself. Got it memorized. Wrong. He was wrong. That wasn't the reason Excalibur had been forged. While it was classed as a holy blade, it had never been intended to combat devils. It was the crystallization of the prayer glory that was etched in the hearts of those scattered before the sword's radiance, the nostalgic, sorrowful, hallowed dream of those placed on the bloody hell called a battlefield, exposed to the fear of death and despair whilst clinging to the desire to be exalted. It was never meant to be wielded by anyone other than Saber. Not even Gilgamesh, ancient Babylon's king of heroes, with his infinite treasury said to possess the prototypes of virtually every noble phantasm, could lay claim to the sword of promised victory. It was never meant to be wielded by anyone but Saber. For anyone else to even consider laying a hand on the blade was to spit on the legend of the proud king of knights and all those who had rallied to her side. Even now, reduced to a shadow of its former glory, the blade silently trembled as it fought to reject the touch of the stray exorcist. Shirou blinked, the faker realizing he'd started running some time ago, feet pounding against the sodden tarmac as he raced from his hiding spot, the hammer in his mind slamming down, the comforting weight of Kanshou and Bakia filling his grasping hands as he streaked towards the pair, the married twin swords clashing against the holy sword as Fried, once again, somehow managed to bring the sword up to block. What the fuck, the insane exorcist yelped, his mad eyes widening in surprise at the unexpected assault before leaping back to give himself some room to maneuver. Hey! Who the fuck are you? Shirou didn't respond, not with words anyway, the faker choosing instead to lunge towards his opponent once more, the married twin blades cutting through the rain to clash against the holy sword of heavenly flare again and again, Fried unable to do anything but backtrack hurriedly whilst fending off the assault as best he could. That was the key difference between the Magus Emiya Shirou and the exorcist Fried Selzen. While both of their swords were fakes, pale imitations of the originals, Fried was relying almost entirely on the power of his holy sword to make up for his sub-par swordsmanship, whereas Shirou was augmenting his skill, power and technique with those of Archer, who had spent decades honing his skills, refining them to the point he could face down heroic spirits despite being a mere human. There was simply no comparison. In a battle between two fakes, the one with the better skills was sure to be the victor. Excalibur rapidly might grant its wielder enhanced speed, but even at his best, Fried couldn't compare to the swift savagery of Siyu Kulane, the monstrous grace of Medusa, the unstoppable force that was Heracles, or the might of the King of Knights and countless other heroes the red-clad counter-guardian had ingrained into his blades. Said Dash. Back the fuck off, damn it. Fried snarled, drawing a firearm from his coat with his free hand and firing it at close range, forcing Shirou to back up a step to avoid the beam of light that emerged, deflecting the ensuing shots with his blades. Fucking die already, will you? Fried. Kiba snarled, the blonde swordsman dropping down from on high, having apparently gotten his second wind during Shirou's initial assault, Fried letting out a curse as he was forced to halt his barrage to avoid being bisected at the last second. Damned, tag-teaming, motherfuckers dash, the priest spat between gasps for air, glaring down at the pair from his perch atop a nearby dry goods store. If you're in such a hurry to die then bring it dash. He trailed off, glancing sharply to the side, as if listening to some unseen voice. His distraction may have lasted less than a second, but to someone like Archer, who had routinely fought monsters far stronger than himself, a second was all the opening needed. Spirit and technique, flawless and firm. Hurling the first set of married blades at the priest's neck, Shirou promptly traced a second set even as he lunged forwards, closing the distance between them, his eyes never leaving his target. Our strength rips the mountains. Time out you fuck. Fried snarled, deflecting the hurled blades easily, only to curse as he brought his sword around to block the follow-up assault. My boss is calling me. He'll be hella pissed if I'm late dash. Shirou ignored him. Words were simply wasted movement in this dance, the faker pressing his assault even as the hurled blades came around from behind, homing in on their respective mates, Fried crying out in alarm as the married blades sliced into his shoulder from behind. Our swords part the rivers. Fucking fuck, the exorcist spat, going for his gun once again, only for Shirou to spread his arms wide, a cross-like cut appearing on the exorcist's chest as his arms were deflected to the sides. You fucking ugh. Our names reach the Imperial Villa. Trace over edge dash. Shirou incanted, burying his foot in Fried's gut, using it as a brace to launch himself into the air, prana surging through his circuits and into his blades as he flipped overhead, using the resulting momentum to raise the altered blades overhead. The two of us cannot hold the heavens together. Kakyaku Sanran. Shirou snarled, the reinforced married blades, now resembling a pair of black and white wings, descending on Fried like the wrath of the god he so despised, the exorcist's eyes widening in alarm as he brought his holy sword up to block the attack, the clash of steel coinciding with a sudden flash of lightning. Kiba's POV. Damn. Kiba cursed, the Knight of Rias Gremory shielding his eyes from the flash of light with holy eraser, his teeth clenched as he felt the preceding impact even standing where he was. Just what the hell is going on here? As much as it chaffed, Kiba would be the first to admit that he'd underestimated Fried earlier. As insane as the stray exorcist was, he hadn't been hailed as a genius prior to being excommunicated for nothing. True, Kiba had managed to hold his own against him during the Twilight healing incident, but he'd had the advantage of a knight's speed and a demon sword that devoured light energy on his side, not to mention the fact Konako was literally hurling parts of the building at the freak whenever she saw an opening. Still, genius or not, there was no way in hell, pun most certainly intended, that a monster like Fried would be qualified to wield a true holy sword like Excalibur. Putting aside the sheer magnitude of difference between a true holy sword and the mass-produced lightsabers all exorcists carried, the number of people with the innate ability to wield a true holy sword could be counted on one hand with room to spare, a fact Kiba was all too familiar with. How then, had Fried, who'd been excommunicated for being too batshit crazy for even the church to effectively control, managed to get his hands on one of their most sacred relics, a holy sword whose very name could give high-ranking devils pause for concern? Were it any other holy blade, Kiba would have probably laughed it off as a bluff even as he took the precautions to avoid being hit. But the moment he'd laid eyes on the priest's blade, once he'd felt the intensity of its holy aura, he'd instantly realized it was an authentic Excalibur, and then the rage had taken over. Never in his wildest dreams had he ever imagined an Excalibur appearing before him. Oh, he'd fantasized about destroying them often enough, but he'd never once harbored any actual intention of storming the churches they were stored in and actually carrying out the deed. For one thing, the resulting fallout would most certainly reignite the war between the three biblical factions, for another there was no telling what Rias would do to him for worrying her like that. And so, faced not only with the root of his grudge, wielded by someone the church would probably thank him for killing, albeit backhandedly, Kiba had let his emotions get the best of him and wound up paying the price, as the still burning cut on his arm could testify. Simply touching a true holy sword was enough to hurt a devil, and low-class devils often died to the smallest of scratches from them. While Kiba wasn't weak by any stretch of the imagination, he was still leagues below a pureblood like Rias or Sana, so it was a miracle he'd only been brought to his knees the moment the blessed steel bit into his flesh. Even now, he could feel his demonic power escaping from the wound, unable to properly heal it due to the lingering touch of the blade's holy aura. That he hadn't dropped holy eraser was probably the only reason Fried hadn't decided to follow up the attack right away. Well, that and the fact someone had literally leapt from the shadows to intercept the mad exorcist mid-taunt, driving him back with a beautiful pair of Chinese Dao swords. An exorcist from the church, the Gremory Knight wondered, eyeing the corpse of the priest Fried had murdered as the light died down. No, I can't be certain, but it looked like he was wearing our school uniform. Are you okay, Kiba-san? A familiar voice inquired, the Gremory Knight's eyes widening in disbelief as his night vision allowed him to make out the features of Amiya Shirou, the elusive brownie of Kuaha who had been driving Rias up the wall due to his penchant for running away whenever she tried to say hello. You were cut earlier, is it bad? Ah, no, I'm fine. Kiba stammered, the pain from the holy sword's cut having lessened, though his left arm still stung if he flexed the muscle. It's barely a scratch, he just caught me off guard earlier. His eyes widened as he realized they were alone. Wait, where's Fried? He got away. Amiya admitted, an annoyed frown marring his features. He used some sort of flash grenade the moment his sword broke. By the time my vision cleared, he'd already disappeared. Damn it! Kiba snarled, slamming his left fist against the wall, heedless of the flash of pain in his upper arm. And I'd finally managed to track one down. He muttered, only to trail off, looking up at the redhead in surprise. Wait, broke? Well, shattered would probably be more appropriate. Amiya admitted, Kiba's eyes widening as the redhead held up what was clearly the hilt of Fried's Excalibur, the knight only now noticing the plastic bag the redhead was carrying in his free hand, which upon closer inspection contained the rest of the blade. I figured leaving the pieces lying around would be a bad idea, even if that guy didn't come back for them. He glanced at Kiba curiously. I take it this isn't the first time he attacked you. Hi. Kiba murmured, shaking his head to clear it, his mind seemingly unable to process the sight of the destroyed holy sword. I mean, yes, we've crossed swords before. He threatened 2 other members of my club some time ago. He grimaced at the memory of the Twilight healing incident. We'd assumed he'd been taken care of, looks like it was just wishful thinking. By we you mean Gremory Rias-senpai, right? Amiya deduced, earning a sharp look from Kiba that he quickly regretted due to the pain in his arm. I'm guessing Shidori Kaiku and the student council are involved as well. Not exactly. Kiba muttered, not wanting to give too much away, but at the same time wondering just how informed the redhead was. As to his knowledge, only high-ranking members of the 3 biblical factions were even aware the Gremory and Satriareses were in Japan. I see. Amiya mused, his expression contemplative, Kiba honestly surprised by the concern in those his ochre eyes as the redhead glanced at his arm. You should probably get that looked at. I'll be fine. Kiba assured him, a wan smile on his face as he rubbed the limb, the cut slowly healing as the holy aura was washed away. That being said, I think I'd better be getting home. You need any help? Amiya wondered, only for Kiba to wave his concerns aside, as unlike Issei-kun, he could simply use the teleportation circle to return to the dorms. Besides, as insane as Fried was, he wasn't suicidal, so it was highly unlikely he'd try anything so soon after losing an Excalibur. What's more, judging by his moment of hesitation prior to Amiya's finishing move, it was clear someone had called him off, most likely whoever had given the lunatic the holy sword, in which case, it was highly unlikely he'd be seeing Fried again anytime soon, as he couldn't imagine them being too pleased with the lunatic for losing such a valuable weapon. Well, if you're certain. Shirou mused, the redhead shrugging offhandedly as he turned on his heel and walked off, pausing only to pick up his book bag from where it lay in a puddle. See you later, Kiba-san. Ah. Kiba nodded, watching the redhead disappear into the night, waiting until he was certain he was alone before slumping back against the wall, the strength in his legs finally giving out. It's a good thing Rias has been bunking with Issei since the wedding. He mused, pulling a flyer out of his pocket, the Gremory crest lighting up as he activated the teleport function. She'd throw a fit if she saw me like this. Azazelle's blazer shining aura darkness bachelor pad. Yo! Aazelle called out, the rugged older man waving lazily at Shirou from his spot on the couch, an open bottle of bourbon and a shot glass placed before him. You're back late, something hold you up at work? Not exactly. Shirou muttered distantly, pulling off his wet clothes as he went, wondering whether or not he should inform his caretaker of what happened even as he wiped himself down with a towel. On the one hand, it was clear Aazelle wasn't human, and something about the man, whenever he wasn't fixated on the latest addition to his ever-growing collection, made it clear he knew more than he let on. On the other hand, how exactly did one broach the subject of how they intervened in a fight between a crazed church executioner and a non-human that ended in the destruction of a holy sword? What's this? Aazelle mused, pausing mid-drink, his relaxed expression belied by his sharp, inquisitive eyes as he glanced at the plastic bag lying next to Shirou's sodden book bag. Picked up something interesting, did we? You could say that. Shirou admitted, deciding to just go wing it and hope for the best, the faker setting the bag down on the coffee table before his caretaker, who looked on in silence as the shards of the holy sword were revealed. Don't suppose you'd know anything about this? Quite a bit, actually. Aazelle admitted, his amused tone belying the sudden shift in the air around them, Shirou tensing as the man reached down to pick up the handle, only to relax with a sigh as the blade didn't seem to react all as Aazelle looked it over with a craftsman's eye enough to know it shouldn't be here in Japan. He glanced up at Shirou, or in pieces for that matter. I ran one of my classmates being attacked by some lunatic who claimed to have killed a priest. Shirou explained, Aazelle's eyes narrowing at the mention of a murder so close by. I think his name was Free something. Fried Selzen. Aazelle muttered, his tone laced with exasperation and what sounded like disappointment as he shook his head. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but honestly this is exactly the kind of thing I'd expect his name to turn up. You know him? Shirou asked rhetorically, as Aazelle had proven to be highly informed in matters pertaining to the Vatican despite his assurances that he wasn't affiliated with them. If I were to ever set foot in a chapel, they'd probably drive me off, had been his exact words, though Shirou had noted a hint of underlying bitterness when he'd said it. By reputation if nothing else. Aazelle confirmed, his expression tired as he set the hilt of the blade back on the table. He was considered the most promising exorcist of his generation, there were even those who proclaimed him a genius. He scoffed. Problem wasn't what you'd call the most pious of disciples. He never believed in God to begin with and only enlisted so he could kill with impunity. And they let someone like that become an executor? Shirou demanded, though truth be told, given how Kyrie turned out, he probably shouldn't be surprised by the church's low standards. Alternate worlds be damned. Why not? Aazelle shrugged dismissively as he poured himself a shot. Who better to turn on the heathens and devils than someone with an axe to grind? He set the bottle aside with a sigh. Truth be told, the problems didn't really start until some genius decided to use him as a test subject for the Holy Sword program. He paused mid-sip. Tell me, Shirou, are you familiar with the legend of Excalibur? Intimately. Shirou scoffed, unable to help the wry smirk that adorned his features. It's the strongest holy sword, entrusted to King Arthur by the Lady of the Lake, he recited, as if challenging the man to contradict him. It was later returned to her hand by Sir Bedivere following the king's fall at Camlan. That's the official version, yes. Aazelle confirmed, neither reacting to the faker's challenge nor denying a word of it. The truth of the matter, however, is that during the battle with Mordred, Excalibur was destroyed. Shirou grimaced but said nothing, his fists clenching as he stared down at the shards of rapidly on the table before them. If he hadn't gazed upon the holy sword, hadn't glimpsed its history when it was recorded into his inner world, he probably would have denied Aazelle's words with the same intensity with which he'd rejected the world when Ilya had died before his eyes. Fortunately, or unfortunately depending on who you ask, the church managed to recover the fragments, and through trial, error and the use of alchemy, managed to reforge them into 7 lesser holy swords, which were distributed among the 3 main branches of Christianity. Aazelle continued, however, it takes a rare kind of individual to wield a true holy sword. Even reduced as they were, without someone capable of wielding them, the 7 Excaliburs may as well have been glorified paperweights as far as the church was concerned. I'm guessing that was the basis behind the Holy Sword program. Shirou deduced, his eyes ochre narrowing in confirmation as Aazelle actually scowled, as if he'd recalled something distasteful. That was the premise by which it was founded, yes. The man muttered, his expression grim as he emptied his glass and poured another shot. The project director, Archbishop Valper Galilei, had always been obsessed with holy swords, Excalibur in particular, so when he learned the truth of what happened to the blade, he was equal parts distraught and delighted. He chuckled at Shirou's look of disbelief. I know, right? Who in their right mind would consider Excalibur's destruction a good thing? Thing is, when he learned of the new blades, Valper secretly hoped one of them would choose him as its new wielder. I'm guessing that wasn't the case. Shirou deadpanned, earning a snort from Aazelle, the faker honestly more sickened at the thought of such a man being deemed worthy of wielding an Excalibur than he'd been watching Fried wield rapidly. Nope. Aazelle agreed cheerfully, looking decidedly chipper for some reason Shirou couldn't explain, yet strangely felt he could relate to. He didn't take being rejected too well, though mind you, even I'd be hurt if I was turned down 7 times in rapid succession. Unfortunately, his depression did little to waylay his admiration for Excalibur and those deemed worthy of wielding one. Aazelle muttered, his good humor vanishing as he stared into his cup as time passed and the church's search for those capable of wielding the new Excaliburs continued to turn up blanks. That admiration turned into an obsession, culminating in Valper, who had become an archbishop by that point, proposing a plan to speed up the process. I won't go into the details, but the short version is that he experimented on those who showed some ability to wield lesser holy swords, in order to determine just what it was that made them able to do so. He sounds more like a magus than a priest. Shirou muttered, Having learned long ago from Kiritsugu and his interactions with Rin and Kairi just what kind of mindset was needed for one to be considered a first-class magus by the association. True magi held few scruples, favoring an end justifies the means approach, provided of course that said means didn't broach on research into vampirism or expose the existence of magecraft, and even that was only out of a desire to avoid confrontation with the Holy Church. Well, there's a thin line between wisdom and insanity. Aazelle mused, no doubt referring to the biblical definition of a magi as wise men. Sadly, as much as they'd like to claim he went mad, the truth is Valper was in complete control of his sensibilities when he decided to do away with his test subjects after his research failed to produce the desired results. He chugged back his drink with a sigh. Needless to say, he was excommunicated as a heretic by the church. But not before making use of his research up to that point, right? Shirou muttered, his expression grim as he held Aazelle's gaze. I can't imagine any other reason that Fried would be able to even touch an Excalibur otherwise. Sharp as always. Aazelle mused, nodding his head approvingly as he poured himself yet another drink. On the surface, Valper was denounced as the genocidal archbishop and was forced to go into hiding to avoid being executed for his crimes. He set the glass aside. However, while they publicly denounced the incident as heresy, the fact remained that Valper's research had greatly improved their understanding of the requirements necessary to wield a true holy sword, namely that the wielder's body contain a strong light attribute. Could he be referring to their origin? Shirou wondered, his features grim as he pooled over what little he knew on the subject. A person's origin was the starting point that defines their existence and directs their actions throughout life, a driving force from within the Akashic record, often referred to as a person's instinct. Those who awaken their origin, intentionally or otherwise, become almost unable to stray from it, and there were even those who believed a person's origin and death were related. While Kiritsugu hadn't been particularly religious, typically going through the motions in order to keep up appearances, he'd nonetheless drilled the importance of a person's origin into Shirou, in particular the effect it could have on a person's magecraft, to the point even someone like Shirou, with his sub-par magic circuits, unusual elemental affinity and lack of talent could become a magus. While Shirou was quite content with his skill set, and had been even before Lancer had gouged his heart out that night so long ago, for those less fortunate, it was possible to alter, or even outright change a person's origin, though from Kiritsugu's explanation, the process bore considerable risk. It would explain Fried's bizarre behavior. He muttered, recalling the light of insanity that had burned in the exorcist's eyes even as he'd struggled to block Shirou's blows. Having his origin changed to the point he could wield a holy sword must have snapped his mind. In the end, the church had their holy swords and the means to wield them, so they were content to sweep the whole incident under the rug. Aazelle continued, his tone dismissive. Though from what I understand, there's still a considerable bounty out on Valper's head, and he's considered persona non grata by just about all of Christendom. He glanced down at the shards of rapidly. I suppose it makes sense he'd flee to Japan. I can't think of any other reason for Fried being able to wield an Excalibur. He scoffed wryly. I can only imagine his face when he finds out Fried broke it. Ah, you think the church will be mad? Shirou muttered, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly as he debated whether or not to admit to breaking the blade. On the one hand, letting Fried take the flak could push the church into dealing with the maniac before he killed again. On the other hand, Shirou somehow knew instinctively that, the moment he revealed his magecraft to Aazelle, everything would change. It wasn't that he didn't trust Aazelle, well, not entirely, the man had his own secrets after all. It was simply that part of being a magus was keeping the existence of magecraft on a need-to-know basis. To date, Aazelle hadn't asked him any pertinent questions, despite clearly possessing knowledge of the moonlit world and having all the reason to do so. As such, Shirou had resolved that, should the man ever ask, he'd tell him everything, but not a second sooner. Mad. Aazelle scoffed, apoplectic. Bad enough an Excalibur was stolen in the first place, destroying one would probably send the Pope into fits. He chuckled at Shirou's alarmed expression. I'm just kidding, Shirou. While the fact the sword was destroyed might upset them, they'd actually prefer that to the alternative of it remaining in the possession of the likes of Fried and Valper. Rapidly certainly felt so. Shirou concurred, recalling the feeling of rejection the holy sword had been emanating towards Fried, only to trail off with a grimace as his arm spasmed. Shit, not now dash. Oi, Shirou, you okay? Aazelle wondered, eyeing the redhead in concern as he gripped his shoulder, Shirou's vision swimming as he turned to regard his benefactor, the world tilting sharply before he fell into the burning darkness. Oi, Shirou! Aazelle barked, lunging to his feet, one hand coming up to steady the teen as he fell over, still clutching his left arm, the Governor-General of the Grigori's eyes narrowing at the limb concealed beneath a holy shroud. He'd known from the moment they met that there was something odd about Emiya Shirou. Holy shroud aside, the kid had a yard-long stare he'd seen countless times before, on war veterans and the survivors of great tragedies, or simply glaring back at him whenever he looked in a mirror. Eyes like that had no place in the head of someone that young in this day and age. Fallen he may be, but unlike many of his subordinates, Aazelle never blamed humanity for his fall, and indeed retained his initial fascination with them. It was for this reason he'd been the first to propose a ceasefire, and it was for this reason the current chain of events was beginning to incite his old anger. First Raineray in her cell and now Fried and Valper, he muttered, glaring at the remains of the holy sword of heavenly flare with distaste. Damn it all, cockabile, just what the hell are you planning? Good morning, Sana. Tsubaki greeted, the tall vice president falling in step with her king as they made their way to school, inclining her head briefly in greeting whenever one of their fellow students called out a greeting. Morning, Tsubaki. Sana returned, the Satri heiress glancing up from her book to acknowledge her queen, before promptly returning to her page. Has there been any word on the matter we discussed? Sadly, no. Tsubaki admitted, inclining her head in apology. Other than his medical records, birth certificate, and transfer details, I haven't been able to uncover anything about Emiya Shirou's background that may waylay our suspicions. I see. Sana mused, her expression calm, though Tsubaki could tell from experience that her king was troubled by the revelation. Ever since Rias had confirmed that Emiya-kun was the source of the magical energy that had been detected around campus, both parties had done their best to determine his origins. Regardless of his allegiances or personality, having a magician running around campus was a security risk. The fact that said magician had gone out of his way to indenture himself with the staff and student body made it all the more necessary to determine whether or not he meant them ill. However, despite their best efforts, neither the Gremory nor Satri information networks had been able to drum up anything on the teen other than basic information that could be easily doctored with the right connections. To make things even harder, he seemed to instinctively know whenever one of them was nearby, which meant Ria's preferred method of cornering her targets with her charm and beauty had been effectively neutralized due to Emiya's strange aversion for her and her peerage. But if that's the case, why doesn't he avoid the council and myself, she wondered, her brow furrowing slightly as she tried to piece together the enigma. It's clear he knows or at least suspects what we are, yet why go out of his way to avoid the Gremoris but not us? Did he not view her peerage as a threat? Admittedly, putting aside their mutual status as siblings to the current Satans, Ria's own reputation as the crimson-haired ruin princess far outstripped her own, but other than their physique there wasn't much difference between the Gremory and Satri heiresses. Indeed, when it came to strategy and tactics, Sana was Ria's superior, having personally selected each member of her peerage to complement one another, whereas Rias had, almost literally in some cases, been handed her members on a silver platter. In hindsight, I should probably have made a move to corner the Red Emperor Dragon sooner. She muttered, though part of her shuddered at the idea of admitting Hyudu Issei into the student council. Saji was bad enough, but despite his flaws her pawn at the very least knew better than to act on his desires, whereas Sana had little doubt Rias had to abuse said desires just to keep Issei in line. Still, worrying oneself sick over minutiae solved nothing at this juncture. At the end of the day, while Emiya Shirou was a magician, he was still a student at Kuaha Academy, which meant that so long as he followed the rules and avoided causing trouble Sana was prepared to cut him some slack. Well, that and the fact he'd pretty much won the entire council over with his cooking. Rias still flushed as scarlet as her hair whenever Sana brought up the devil's food cake incident. Sana! Tsubaki called out, her calm tone belying a sudden sharpness, the air around her queen thickening as she subtly braced herself for combat over there. Sana glanced up, the book in her hands snapping shut as she followed her queen's gaze, her eyes narrowing not at the shady-looking figures clad in church robes loitering by the school gate, but the object wrapped in bandages one of them bore on her back, the holy energies coming off it causing her skin to shiver despite the distance between them. A holy sword! She muttered, struggling to maintain her mask of calm as she met the gaze of the church's agents without fear. Just what on earth is going on around here? A world of iron dust and forge smoke. Crawling like ants beneath his skin, his flesh, violated by foreign steel, burned as it fought not to reject, but to incorporate, the steel that was similar yet inherently different to its own. His body is made of swords. Again he stood upon the hill of swords, gazing upon the endless twilight of his borrowed dream, his body perforated with the blades of his enemies. His blood is of iron and his heart of glass. The sound of metal work filled the air, the giant gears that filled the sky obscured by smog and iron dust as they endlessly added to his arsenal. He survived through countless battles. A field of corpses, cut down by his hands, a tree whose branches were laden with cadavers. Young and old, man, woman and child, all he had cut down in the name of peace. Never once retreating. Now his neck filled the noose, the spears of those he fought to protect perforating his flesh as their leaders looked on imperiously. Never once being understood. A ring of light, a promise of aid, a foolishly accepted offer that led to further bloodshed, his bloodied blades wielded against his will in the name of peace. He was always alone. He knelt atop the hill of swords, atop the corpses of his enemies, atop the corpses of his allies, surrounded on all sides by the pinnacle of weaponry, the blades of heroes and villains alike. Intoxicated with victory on a hill of swords. Alone he knelt, forever alone, forever denied the rest he deserved, forever denied the right to choose whether to take or save a life. Thus, his life has no meaning. Another battle, another call to duty. Against his will he climbs to his feet, his soul screaming at his body to halt as his once precious blades appeared in his hands. His body was certainly made out of swords. Shirou awoke with a yell, the faker's ochre eyes wide with alarm as he reached out as if to hold someone back, only to blink, the ever-distant image of the red-clad counter-guardian's back vanishing from his sight, replaced with the image of his room in Aazelle's mansion. When, he began, wondering how on earth he'd gotten to his room, only to grimace at the sharp, burning pain in his left side, his right hand coming up to grip his left shoulder tightly as he closed his eyes. Go back! He muttered, visualizing a wall of sorts between the circuits which bound Archer's arm to his body, a purely mental exercise he'd been taught to help differentiate between his and the Red Knight's memories go back. There was some resistance, naturally, the prana of the arm warring against his will as it fought to invade his circuits, but eventually he managed to separate them, the barrier Rin had taught him holding for the moment, allowing only the barest trickle of invasive prana through. It's been a while since I had to fight to force it back. He muttered, grimacing as he opened his eyes, regarding the wrapped limb as if it were an animal on a leash. Guess I've been pushing myself too hard. Whatever else could be said about Kodomine Kaire, the man's skills as both a priest and a magus had been the real deal, allowing him to pull off a feat that, by all rights, bordered on miraculous when he, in direct opposition to natural providence, successfully transplanted the arm of a heroic spirit onto a human. By all rights, the arm should have disappeared back into the ether when Archer faded away. It was testament to Kaire's skills that the man had been able to graft the limb onto Shirou's magic circuits, allowing it to remain in this world by using his own prana as a source of power. Shirou honestly didn't know what Archer had been thinking when he'd proposed the operation, but as it stood, the arm, or artificial phantasm as he'd come to regard it, was both his ultimate weapon and instrument of his destruction in one. On the one hand, it passively fed him Archer's memories, history and, more importantly, his battle experience and knowledge of projection magecraft. On the other, putting aside their shared origins, there was a stark difference between the Magus Emiya Shirou and the counter-guardian summoned as the Archer of the Fifth Heavens feel. Archer had regretted sticking to his ideals after being betrayed by them and in turn being forced to betray them after becoming a counter-guardian, whereas Shirou willingly cast aside those ideals to protect those important to him, only for the world to spit upon his actions as if punishing him for daring to be selfish after so long. In the end, they were two entirely different people, and as a result their inner worlds, the very basis of their magecraft, clashed and tore one another apart in a bid for dominance, as no matter how similar they were in life, a human being could not compare to a heroic spirit, to the point that even tapping into the abilities of the artificial phantasm for a second ran the risk of Shirou being swallowed whole by the flow of Archer's power. It was for this reason that Kodomine had given him the Shroud of Martin, a conceptual weapon that allowed them to partially seal off the remains of Archer's circuits within the artificial phantasm. While far from a perfect solution, as even without employing magecraft prana continuously flowed through the body, forcing Shirou to subconsciously erect a barrier between his circuits and Archer's to keep them from activating, it did lessen the strain on him to the point he could live an ordinary life. On the upside, even with the effect reduced, the passive boost to Shirou's abilities allowed him to easily surpass those of a normal human. On the downside, the resulting initial feedback from moving the arm for an extended period of time with the circuit active was akin to being cut and stabbed by his own body. During his initial controlled experiment, wherein he partially undid the bindings to test his limits, the sheer agony had been so intense he honestly couldn't recall what he'd been doing when he came to, save that he'd narrowly escaped death atop a hill of swords. It had been the first time in 10 years he'd truly feared for his life as he had during the night he'd wandered through the Fuyaki fire. Even being hunted down by Lancer, staring down Berserker or struggling against Gilgamesh hadn't scared him to the point he actually feared for his life. There had even been times he'd considered cutting the damn thing off, but without it he wouldn't have been able to stand beside Rin and Ilya when they'd gone to confront Sukin and Sakura. That, and a part of him had wanted to live up to the idea Kodomine proposed, that if he honed his skills to the point they matched Archer's, he'd be able to make the arm his own without having to rely on the shroud to seal it. As someone whose life had been built upon borrowed, flawed ideals, the idea of moving beyond relying on Archer's skills, to take what the counter-guardian had developed and make it his own, was something Shirou found wholly appealing. While there hadn't truly been time to experiment prior to setting out to destroy the Grail, since awakening and regaining his strength, the Faker had used his free time to carefully build upon what little he'd garnered from Archer's knowledge on projection magecraft. Despite his growth, however, he still couldn't trace A-rank noble phantasms without relying on the power of the artificial phantasm, nor could he break a phantasm without running the risk of it exploding in his face. Still, the fact he was merely bedridden after using the crane wing was proof enough that he was far closer to mastering the arm than he ever would have been back home, a fact he attributed partially to the overabundance of prana and the lack of interference from Gaia. Thanks to these, he was able to increase the amount of time he was able to interact with the limb, essentially allowing him to treat Archer's memories as cheat notes, which combined with the reduced costs for tracing made it much easier to progress with his chosen magecraft than before. That being said, while he could trace anything up to rank B, the only weapons he felt comfortable wielding in battle were Kanshou and Bakia, the married twin blades that, while noble phantasms, lacked a true owner, allowing Archer and Shirou by proxy to incorporate them into their personal style with relative ease. At the very least I know using crane wing won't kill me, he mused, smirking wryly as he rolled out of bed, grimacing at the feel of the sweat-stained sheets, making a mental note to change them as he made for the shower, only to pause at the sight of the sunset outside. Damn, missed an entire day. He muttered, irritation warring with resignation as he grabbed a towel and made for the bathroom, hoping that Aazelle didn't forget to call in to explain his absence, as he didn't feel like getting into an argument with Sana, who would no doubt blame it on his part-time job. Hope I didn't miss anything at school. Kuaha Academy Occult Research Club Room. The normally jovial air of the Occult Research Club was decidedly tense that afternoon, as the members of Rias Gremory's peerage assembled for the meeting between their king and two envoys from the church. That representatives of the church would seek audience with the devil was strange enough, that said envoys were in possession of holy swords had Rias on guard. It was instinctual, the mere presence of a holy sword was repugnant to devils, a stark reminder of the bitter enmity between them and heaven, an enmity which had never truly vanished even during the centuries of ceasefire since the last Great War. It was rather disconcerting for Issei, the pawn torn between his desire to protect Rias and his fellow peerage members and his discomfort that one of the holy sword wielders was none other than Shirou Irina, his childhood friend who, as it turned out, had actually been a girl all this time. Since when did my life become a harem anime, he wondered, not that he was complaining mind you, hell, if it weren't for the fact doing so would result in divine punishment, he'd be thanking God every day for putting him in this situation. It was simply rather disconcerting to find out the guy you'd basically run around naked with was a cute girl who ran around killing devils on a mission from God. Though then again, considering the stink eye her partner, Zenovia, was sending their way, it probably wasn't that far-fetched at all. From the moment he'd encountered her during his reunion with Irina last night, the blue-haired girl had given off this oppressive aura, as if she were just barely restraining herself from drawing the massive blade she was carrying and lobbing off Issei's head. As such, Issei felt that Ria's concerns were more than justified, and shared her belief that the sooner they found out what the pair wanted, the sooner they could see the back of them. As you know, Irina spoke up after introductions were made. The church has claimed possession of 6 of the 7 Excalibur swords, entrusting 2 to each of the 3 main branches of Christianity. 2 at the Catholic Church headquarters in the Vatican, 2 with the Protestants, and 2 with the Eastern Orthodox Church, correct? Rias inquired, earning a nod of confirmation from Irina even as Issei wondered where the 7th Excalibur could be, the idea of something like that running around unchecked troubling him on an instinctual level. Right. Irina continued, her expression as bright as ever, though her words carried an undertone of seriousness as she pressed on. However, not too long ago, fallen angels assaulted the branches and made off with an Excalibur from each. It went without saying that Issei wasn't the only one alarmed by that revelation, though it probably hit a lot closer to home with him, given how he'd become a devil in the first place. He could still recall the smile on Rainere's face as the fallen asked him to die, stabbing him in the heart with a spear of light and leaving him to rot like so much roadkill. Even after he'd gotten revenge, even after Rias had used her power of destruction to wipe the fallen from the face of the earth, the pain she'd inflicted on him, and Asia, had left scars that had never truly healed properly, and probably never would. After all, you never truly forgot your first love, and while it had turned out to have all been an act on Rainere's part, Issei had honestly loved her despite the brief time they were together. As a result, he'd come to regard the fallen angels with more trepidation than their brethren, who to date hadn't really done anything other than administer divine retribution whenever he, or any devil really, made the mistake of praising God or offering prayers in his name. As such, learning the fallen were in possession of 3 Excalibur-class holy swords came as something of a shock. These are from the ones we have left, Zenovia revealed, holding up her wrapped, cross-like weapon for emphasis. Issei shivering at the presence of the holy aura he could sense beneath the bandages. I have been entrusted with Excalibur destruction by the Vatican. And mine's Excalibur mimicry. Irina chirped, smiling cheerfully as she shrugged her cloak aside, giving Issei a brief glimpse of her left breast before gesturing to what appeared to be a lace ribbon wrapped around her exposed held up her arm to reveal a simple ribbon wrapped around her bicep. Thankfully it can assume any shape the user needs, so unlike Zenovia's the Protestant Church HQ didn't have to bribe anyone so I could get it past customs. Irina. Zenovia muttered, the Catholic representative glaring at Issei's childhood friend pointedly, her eye twitching for some unfathomable reason. There was no reason to tell them that. Oh come on Zenovia. Irina reprimanded with a pout. Even if they are devils, given the situation, isn't it better that we extend some trust towards one another? She winked at the Gremory peerage, though Issei somehow knew it was meant for him in particular. Besides, I'm not so weak that knowing my sword's ability will give them an advantage. I see. Rias mused, a deceptively calm smile adorning her features as she regarded the pair before her calculatingly. Well then, having heard all that, I can only assume from your desire to speak with me that there's something your superiors need. She smiled at Zenovia's frown. So tell me how we can be of service to you. Our request. Zenovia began, only to frown and shake her head briefly. No. Our order is that you do not involve yourselves at all. She matched Ria's glare with one of her own. I'll keep things simple, the coming battle is between the fallen and the church. As such, we would appreciate it if you devils didn't get interfere. Are they insane? Issei gulped, shivering in anticipation as Ria's power spiked for a split second, the perverted pawn stepping closer to a nervous Asia as Konako clenched her fists and Akeno began to smile in that sexily dangerous way that promised pain and pleasure in equal amount. That sounds like an accusation. Rias noted, her tone cordial, yet carrying an undertone of challenge as she continued to match glares with Zenovia. Are you afraid that we devils will side with the fallen angels to keep you from retrieving the stolen Excaliburs? Headquarters did mention it as a possibility, yes. Zenovia admitted fearlessly, Issei's respect for the woman's guts increasing even as he questioned her sanity. After all, you devils despise holy swords. Wouldn't it make more sense for your interests to coincide with those of the fallen angels? She's fucked. Issei muttered, resisting the urge to offer a prayer for the, admittedly hot, holy sword user, knowing from experience that only Ria's restraint was keeping his king from reducing everything in front of her to nothing with her power of destruction. That is why our superiors formally ask that you stay out of our affairs. Zenovia continued, either heedless or unconcerned by the impending dead end sitting 2 feet in front of her. Even if you are the Lucifer's younger sister, should we discover that you have sided with the Grigori, we have been given strict orders to cut you down. For a moment, Rias actually looked like she was about to unleash hell, literally and figuratively, on Zenovia for her rudeness, but the mention of her elder brother, Surtsk's Lucifer of the 4 great Satans, calmed her somewhat. I see, the higher UPS must be desperate if they went so far as to inform you of my relation to a Satan. She smiled coyly at Zenovia's scowl. However, since it's clear you neglected to do your research beyond that, I'll make this simple for you. There is no chance in hell that I, or any member of my peerage, would ever tarnish the name of House Gremory or that of the Satan Lucifer by siding with the fallen angels. I see. Zenovia noted, actually seeming amused by Ria's words. For some reason just hearing that is good enough for me. To tell the truth, instructions from headquarters aside, I never truly believed that the Lucifer's younger sibling would be so stupid as to ally herself with the Grigori. Your faith is humbling. Rias shot back, clearly enjoying herself now that they had reached something of an understanding. However, having said that, you must understand I won't offer aid to your side either. Naturally. Zenovia acknowledged. Truth be told, we're satisfied with you simply agreeing to not involve yourself at all. Even if it did improve our odds, our superiors would prefer to avoid any potential fallout that may arise from the Lucifer's sister siding with the church. She glanced at Irina, the two of them rising to their feet as one. Thank you for your time, we'll see ourselves out. Won't you have some tea before you go? Rias asked, gesturing to Akeno, who moved to prepare the snacks only to pause as Zenovia shook her head, much to Irina's disappointment. No thanks, I'm not here to make friends with devils. The Catholic countered, ignoring the looks being sent her way as she turned on her heel, only to pause as her eyes met a concerned Asia's. I see, when I saw you in Hyudu Issei's home I thought it may be you. She turned to face the confused bishop. Tell me, are you the witch, Asia Argento? Asia flinched as if struck across the face, the former holy maiden lowering her eyes in shame even as Issei bristled, his left fist clenching in preparation to summon his sacred gear. "Oh my god, it is you!" Irina exclaimed, seemingly unaware of the shift in atmosphere. "I'd heard you were banished because you could heal fallen angels and devils, but this is the first I've heard of you becoming a devil yourself." While Irina's tone implied she didn't mean anything by her words, that didn't lessen the effect they had on Asia, who couldn't even muster the strength to look them in the face. To think that someone once revered as a saint could fall low enough to even consider becoming a devil. Zenobia muttered, the disgust in her tone like another slap in the face to Asia. "Tell me, do you still believe in God, Asia Argento?" "Don't be silly, Zenobia." Irina chuckled, waving a hand dismissively, heedless of Asia's increasing discomfort. "She's a devil, right? There's no way she'd still believe in God if she fell that far." "No." Zenobia countered, her eyes never leaving Asia's trembling form. "There are those whom, despite betraying the teachings, remain somewhat pious, as if to punish themselves for their sins." "Really?" Irina wondered, blinking at the revelation, as if the idea of a devil experiencing guilt was something new to her. "Is that true, Asia-san? You still believe in God even after becoming a devil?" "It's true," Asia admitted, her voice soft, lined with unshed tears. "I've never been able to just let it go. I believed in God my whole life, even when..." She trailed off, unable to give word to the suffering she'd endured at the hands of the church, who branded her a witch, and the fallen, who took her in only to kill her for her sacred gear. "Is that so?" Zenobia noted, her gaze hardening as she turned to face the bishop, holy sword in hand, though she hadn't removed the wrappings yet. "In that case, you should allow us to cut you down this instant in the name of God. As it stands, even if you have sinned, God will extend his hand in forgiveness." "Cut the shit!" Issei snarled, surprising even Rias, who froze in the middle of rising from her seat, the pawn stepping between Asia and Zenobia, his teeth clenched to the point of cracking as he dared the Catholic to take a single step closer. "You assholes were the ones who put her on a pedestal as a saint in the first place, but then you have the balls to brand her a witch for using her sacred gear to heal someone in need and cast her out into the world alone? Where the hell do you get off? A genuine saint can survive on the love of God alone." Zenobia shot back, matching the devil glare. For her to desire anything other than his blessings simply meant she was never fit to be a saint. "You're saying that if Asia had truly loved God, then nothing would have happened to her?" Issei shot back hotly, pissed as all hell at her declaration. "Funny, I don't recall God's so-called love doing his son any good." "Issei-san." Asia gasped, a sentiment shared by Irina while Zenovia's eyes widened in outrage at the blasphemy the devil had just voiced, her fingers tightening around the hilt of her sword almost instinctively. "You shouldn't dash. God didn't do jack shit to save Asia, one of the kindest, most innocent people in the world, when the fallen angels tried to steal her sacred gear." Issei persisted, too high on vitriol and righteous anger to care what he was saying. "If you assholes even think of harming a hair on her head after she finally got to live the life she wanted, I'll spend the rest of my life making you regret it." Tough words from a low-class devil. Zenobia muttered, her eyes narrowing at the challenge in the pawn's words. "Should I take that as a declaration of war against the entire church? Even if it isn't, I'll take you all on." A familiar voice called out, Issei's eyes widening as he spied Kiba leaning against the wall, his damnably handsome features set in a fierce scowl as he glared at Zenovia's holy sword with murder in his eyes. "Who are you?" Zenobia demanded, her own eyes narrowing at the animosity she sensed from the night, even Irina's perpetual good cheer vanishing in the fact of such open hostility. "I suppose you could call me your senpai." Kiba mused, the smile on his lips belying the cold look in his eyes as he glared not at the nun, but her sword. "Though truth be told, I was apparently considered a failure." "I see." Zenobia muttered, her expression unreadable as she glanced between Kiba and Issei. "It seems you've been lax in disciplining your servants, Rias Gremory. I hope you don't mind if I teach them a little lesson in manners. Just take it outside." Rias sighed, holding the bridge of her nose as if fighting back a headache. "Also, I'm sure I don't need to remind you of what will happen if you harm them permanently." "Oh, rest assured, we won't need to go all out." Zenobia replied confidently, her tone mocking as she smirked. "They'd better come at us with intent to kill, however, otherwise this won't last long." One epic beatdown later. And in truth, it hadn't. Even going full throttle, neither Issei nor Kiba had managed to land a decisive blow on either holy sword wielder, though Issei blamed his loss solely on Konako's interference. "Seriously, what the fuck, Konako-chan," he muttered, glaring at the white-haired rook even as she leveled a deadpan glare of her own right back at him. "It wasn't as if I purposefully destroyed your clothes earlier. If you hadn't warned Irina, she never would have known my dress break was coming." Not that the sight of his childhood friend in her battle outfit lacked a certain appeal, mind you. For the battle garb of a holy sword wielder, the scandalously tight black outfit left very little to the imagination. Well, to the normal imagination that is. Issei's was currently working overtime as he recorded every detail to memory. I suggest the next time we cross swords, you endeavor to keep your cool, senpai. Zenovia warned as she walked away from Kiba's prone form, ignoring the look of hatred the knight was leveling at her back as she knelt to pick up her cloak. I trust you're satisfied, Rias Gremory. Yes, I'm grateful for your diligence in ensuring they suffered no permanent injury. Rias returned as Zenovia replaced her cloak. Just out of curiosity, were you able to determine the name of the fallen who stole the Excaliburs? We have confirmation that the culprit is a leader of the Grigori faction. Zenovia replied, her tone grim. More accurately, the culprit has been confirmed to have been Cockabile, the fallen star of heaven. Cockabile! Rias exclaimed, even Kiba looking alarmed by the revelation from his prone position on the grass. Wait, don't tell me knowing that, the church only sent the two of you? Are you trying to die? We will do all that is necessary to keep the Excaliburs out of the hands of the fallen. Zenovia shot back, her expression cold in the face of the devil's concern, even if it means throwing our lives away. We understand the dangers all too well, Gremory-san. Irina assured them with a wan smile. There's already been a casualty, a priest from the Orthodox Church who came to scout ahead was murdered last night. I know the man you're talking about. Kiba grit out as he struggled to his knees, teeth clenched from the pain of his wound. He was killed by Fried Selzen, wielding an Excalibur in the shape of a kriss. Fried Selzen. Zenovia muttered, her expression turning grim even as Issei and Asia voiced their alarm at the lunatic's name and Excalibur rapidly. That complicates matters somewhat. Maybe not as much as you think. Kiba countered, smirking mockingly at the pair. I don't particularly care if you believe me, but during my fight with Fried, a third party joined in and destroyed the Excalibur. What? Irina gasped, the Protestant battle nun gaping at the knight in alarm, whereas Zenovia chose to instead march forward, grabbing him by the collar and hoisting him to his feet despite the protests of the devils. Who was it? The blue-haired battle nun demanded, pressing the rapt edge of destruction against the blonde's throat, clearly in no mood for games. Where did they go? Answer me. I honestly couldn't say. Kiba replied, grimacing even as he glared defiantly into Zenovia's eyes. I'd already been cut by the holy sword by that point. If whoever it was hadn't jumped in, Fried would have cut my head off. He ignored Ria's look of alarm. All I know is that he fought with twin Chinese swords that took the shape of angel wings when he destroyed the Excalibur. Angel wings, a sacred gear user. Irina wondered even as Zenovia scowled. Whoever he is, he can't be affiliated with the Vatican or Protestants if he uses Eastern blades. Did you notice anything else about him? Nothing, Kiba countered. As I said, I'd already been cut by Fried's holy sword, so just keeping my eyes open was tough enough. Last I saw he was gathering the Excalibur shards after Fried ran away. So there's a third party involved in all this. Zenovia muttered, her expression dark as she released her grip on Kiba's collar, glaring down at the knight as he glared up at her. I thank you for the information, senpai, but from now on kindly see to it that you don't involve yourself any further in our affairs. Let's go, Irina. Ah, right. Irina stammered, pausing only to offer Issei a farewell and a promise to judge him later before hurrying to follow her partner wherever it was they were going, leaving the devils of the Gremory group to tend to their own. Are you okay, Issei-san? Asia asked, the shy bishop placing her small palms on the pawn's stomach, her sacred gear, twilight healing, slowly healing the narrow cut Irina's Excalibur mimic had left with a soothing light. Damn it! The lecherous pawn muttered, utterly shamed at having embarrassed himself in front of not only Asia, but the rest of the Gremory peerage after shooting his mouth off like he did. Sorry to worry you like this, Asia. I'm just glad that the wound was minimal despite it coming from a holy sword. Asia admitted with a sigh of relief, her shoulders trembling slightly. I honestly thought you were going to die back there, Issei-san. Hey, I'm the one who should apologize. Issei stammered, waving off the former nun's admittedly well-placed concerns before she broke into tears. I'm the one who messed up and ended up blowing your clothes away. That's all right. Asia assured him with a saintly smile that, were she not a devil now, would have surely been accompanied by a halo and choir. I'm sure you were planning something completely different, right Issei-san? I'm just glad you're okay. Are we sure Rias brought you back as a devil and not an angel? Issei wondered, bathing in that radiant smile despite knowing all too well the only thing on his mind at the time had been seeing Irina au naturel, the pervy pawn flinching as Konako proceeded to massage his shoulders. You might have won if you'd boosted one more time. The taciturn Rook opined, completely heedless of Issei's grunts of pain as she dug her fingers into his soft, tender flesh with all her enhanced Rook strength. I'd have definitely won if you hadn't given away my secret technique. Issei wanted to retort, but thought better of angering the little rook, especially given she already had a grip on him. One set of injuries was enough, thank you very much. So tell me, Yueto. Rias demanded, the group looking up to see their king sitting across from her knight, arms folded beneath her breasts, the frown on her face belying the concern in her eyes. How long were you planning to wait before telling me you had a run-in with Fried and an Excalibur? I was actually planning to tell you the minute I arrived at the club room. Yueto admitted, his tone honest, implying no falsehood, as he gazed at his clenched fists. I'm sorry I let my anger at the holy swords put you on the spot like that. It's nothing. Rias assured him with a sigh. I'm just glad you and Issei came out of it without permanent injury. Her eyes narrowed still. This third party you mentioned concerns me, can you truly recall nothing about them that might determine their allegiance? I only said that to those two so they wouldn't go running after him before we had a chance to ask him ourselves. Yueto countered, a wry smirk adorning his lips. Well, that and the fact that after he destroyed the Excalibur, he stuck around to check if I was alright before leaving with the shards, so I figured I owed him that much. Either way, I definitely got more than a good look at him. Nice one, Kiba. Issei cheered, pumping his fist in appreciation of the handsome knight's cunning, only to grimace as the cut on his abdomen stung in protest of his sudden actions. Indeed, Akeno noted, the Thunder Priestess' sultry smile sending shivers of trepidation down the spines of everyone exposed to it, even Rias. How particularly devilish of you, Kiba-kun, lying to your cute Kuaha like that, and for a complete stranger too. I wouldn't say he's a stranger, Kiba countered, smiling wanly as Akeno blinked in confusion. In fact, if memory serves, he's been an object of interest for both you and Sonokaiku for some time now, Baku. Amiya-kun. Rias exclaimed, Akeno's eyes widening in surprise even as Issei grimaced at the mention of the brownie of Kuaha, still nursing a grudge from the time the bastard broke his nose and got off scot-free. Are you absolutely certain, Yueto? Without a doubt. Kiba confirmed, his expression grim as he gazed at his linked fingers. He walked right up to me after driving off Fried, he even addressed me by name, as well as referring to Sana as Kaiku. He glanced up at Rias for the first time also. It would appear he knows that I'm affiliated with you, and I suspect he knows we aren't human, though considering he referred to Sonokaiku by her pseudonym Shidori, it's possible he doesn't know we're devils, or at least, not affiliated with the 72 Pillars. That's a little troubling, I have to admit. Rias muttered, a sentiment shared by all of the more experienced members of her peerage, Asia and Issei merely looking lost by the turn of events. And you're certain he had the Excalibur fragments? He practically dangled them beneath my nose. Kiba muttered, scoffing wryly at the imagery. If I hadn't been so weakened from the fight with Fried, I'd probably have challenged him for them. As it is, it took everything I had just to activate the teleport circle to the dorms after he left. I was wondering why you skipped class today. Rias muttered, concern warring with disapproval as she regarded her knight with a stern glare. You should have contacted me immediately, Yueto. She reprimanded, only to sigh after a moment's pause. Either way, I'm glad you're alright. I'm far from alright, Baku. Kiba countered, his tone bitter as he clenched his fists together, eyes boring a hole in the ground. I haven't been alright since that night in the snow, and until I find the ones responsible, I doubt I'll ever truly be alright. Yueto. Rias murmured, her eyes soft, filled with naught but concern for her knight, only to blink in surprise as he rose to his feet, surprise giving way to realization as he made for the door. Wait, Yueto, she called out, rising sharply to her feet as he paused in his tracks. Don't go doing anything drastic. As your king, I won't forgive you if you do anything to bring shame on the name of House Gremory. I understand what you're saying, Baku. Kiba quietly assured his king without turning to face her. But even if you are my king, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my comrade's sacrifice. His fist clenched around the door handle even as Rias flinched. I won't ask you to forgive this act of selfishness, but I'd never be able to forgive myself if I just let this opportunity pass me by. Yueto. Rias murmured, her expression hurt as she watched her knight walk out the door, though she made no move to stop him, her concern for him warring with her understanding of his situation, causing her to bite her lower lip in consternation. Damn it all, why can't things ever be simple? We do seem to have a nasty penchant for getting caught up in the affairs of others. Akeno mused, though despite her smile it was clear the queen was troubled by Kiba's actions as well. So what do we do about Amiya-kun? She asked, clearly trying to take Rias' mind off their errant knight for the moment. I assume you'll be contacting Sana-san to fill her in on the juicy details. Naturally. Rias confirmed, rubbing her eyes with an exhausted sigh. While the fact he aided Kiba in his fight with Fried is something of a relief, all it means is he isn't allied with the Grigori. For all we know he could be a sleeper from a rogue branch of the church, sent to spy on our operations, or even an unaffiliated party seeking to make a move during the confusion. She lowered her hands to reveal determined blue eyes. At the very least, we need to determine whether he's a threat or not. If you ask me, he's definitely a threat. Issei muttered, grimacing as he recalled his first encounter with the brownie of Kuaha, more specifically how the redhead had spurned Issei's heartfelt invitation to join him, Motohama and Matsuda in the act of peeking on the girls' changing room. Now Issei was no stranger to rejection or violence on his person. Hell, prior to joining the occult research club, the only way he'd ever get to see any real live TNA usually resulted in him and his comrades having the living shit beat out of them by girls on a daily basis. The only time they ever gotten beaten up by guys, it was usually the boyfriend or sibling of one of their targets, so Issei had felt perfectly safe extending an olive branch to Shirou, who had no relatives in Kuaha and, if rumors were to be believed, wasn't romantically interested in anyone either. The only sign Issei had that he'd made a mistake was Emiya's ochre eyes narrowing in a look of disgust so intense it made the future pawn feel lower than a cockroach before the redhead's fist buried itself in his face, sending him flying into Matsuda and Motohama, the three of them tumbling ass over tits until they came to a halt in a tangle of limbs at the end of the hall. Used to being punished for his perversions as he was, Issei probably wouldn't have minded the broken nose so much if Emiya had at least gotten detention for it. But no, according to Motohama and Matsuda, not only had the redhead not been punished, his reputation among the staff and female students had apparently skyrocketed while theirs plummeted yet again. In short, the possibility of Emiya Shirou being an enemy was equal parts worrying and welcome to Hyudo Issei. Worrying due to the fact he could apparently match Fried Selzen wielding an Excalibur, and even destroy said holy blade, and welcome in that Issei could finally return the favor without getting shafted for it by the faculty. Kuaha Academy, midday. It went without saying that Shirou's return to Kuaha Academy was a cautious one, the redhead faker spending every moment twitching at shadows and sudden noises, his hands clenching, ready to summon Kanshou and Bakia to defend himself. While Aazelle had assured him that not even Fried would be stupid enough to try anything on academy grounds without considerable backup, Shirou hadn't forgotten the insanity in the stray exorcist's eyes, and it wasn't as if Fried was working alone, as someone had to have given him rapidly in the first place. There was also Rias Gremory to consider. After their little altercation, there was no way Kiba hadn't informed the red-headed Onisama of Shirou's involvement. And since Rias was apparently good friends with Shidori Sauna, there was a good chance the rest of the student council now knew about him as well. While this was admittedly less of a concern since, like Aazelle, they apparently harbored no ill will towards humanity, it still left the faker backed into a corner, surrounded on all sides by non-human entities that not only knew he wasn't normal, but had destroyed an apparently holy sword. And so he'd come to school, despite Aazelle insisting he get some more rest, prepared to face an ambush, or at the very least an interrogation, only to spend the entire day jumping at shadows. It therefore came as something of a relief when they made their move when lunch period rolled round, the faker opening the door to his class, intending to eat on the roof, where he'd be awarded a modicum of privacy and room to maneuver in the event of an attack, only to find Saji Gen's hero waiting for him. Yo, Emiya! The non-human greeted, his tone and posture so similar to that of the faker's old friend, Mata Shinji, that for a moment he almost lashed out reflexively, only stopping at Saji's look of alarm. Whoa! Simmer down, the blonde yelped, raising both hands placatingly. I'm not here to cause trouble, Kaiku simply wanted to see you. I see. Shirou noted, the faker relaxing slightly now that one of the shoes he'd been watching for finally dropped, offering the blonde a polite nod. Sorry if I startled Saji-san, I've been expecting something like this all day and it kind of made me jittery. Yeah, I can understand that. Saji concurred, relaxing somewhat as he gestured for Shirou to follow him through the halls filled with gossiping schoolgirls, pausing only briefly to compliment, or flirt, in passing before growing serious as they arrived at the student council office. I've brought him, Kaiku, he called out, opening the door and holding it open for Shirou to enter, the redhead doing so cautiously, several nameless blades ready to be brought into the world at the slightest hint of violence from anyone inside. Thank you, Saji. Sana offered, the reserved student council president sitting beside Rias on a double chair with Tsubaki and Akeno standing behind them. The rest of the student council and occult research club were likewise scattered around the room, the former greeting the redhead with reserved smiles while the latter seemed divided between indifferent, nervous, and outright hostile. Hey, that's right. Shirou muttered, blinking at the sight of a scowling Hyudo Issei, having entirely forgotten that the pervert had joined the orc some time ago, sometime after he'd been running around claiming to have gotten a girlfriend if memory served. At the time, Shirou hadn't given the matter much thought. Indeed, like most of the student body, he actively strove not to think about the perverted trio at all if he could help it, but it was kind of hard to ignore when someone's scent changed from that of a human to something distinctly not so overnight. What is it? Issei demanded, the pervert's voice snapping the redhead out of his thoughts, realizing he'd been unwittingly staring at the pervert fairly intensely. You wanna start something, bastard? Issei. Calm down. Rias called out, her tone brooking no argument, the self-proclaimed harem king flinching at her words before backing down, though he continued to glare at Shirou sullenly. I'm sorry, Emiya-kun. The redhead offered with a smile. I'm afraid Issei's still a little sore with you. So long as he keeps his hands to himself, we shouldn't have a problem. Shirou assured her, and in all honesty he didn't care to deal with the pervert's shenanigans at the moment, not with several decidedly more palpable threats staring him right in the face here, he offered, holding out the bag he'd brought with him. I figured something like this would happen, so I brought a peace offering. My, how considerate of you. Akeno chirped, the reason for her amusement apparent as almost every female in the room, excluding herself and Asia Argento, who merely perked up slightly, straightened at the sight of the bag, their eyes locking onto it like heat-seeking missiles. More of your infamous devil's food cake. Nothing so fancy, Shirou assured her, earning looks of disappointment from the crowd, though Sana looked oddly relieved for some reason. Just some daifuku I made the night before. At the mention of the ground mochi balls, the disinterested expression on the white-haired loli in the corner was replaced with a cat-like intensity that would have almost been cute if looking at her didn't remind Shirou painfully of Ilya. Thank you, Emiya-kun. Sana offered, Tsubaki accepting the bag from him with a polite nod before retreating with Akeno to the small kitchenette the student council used to prepare tea. I take it you know why we invited you here today. I have my suspicions. Shirou admitted, his tone relaxed as he subtly ran his eyes over the assembled non-humans, only to frown at a glaring absence among them. I don't see Kiba-san, is he alright? Yueto is, taking a leave of absence at the moment. Ria sighed, her troubled expression heightening the faker's concern for the blonde swordsman. Oh, don't worry, he's fine. She assured him with a genuine smile, though I must admit, it does my heart good to see you so concerned for him. Which brings us to the situation at hand. Sana cut in, Shirou straightening reflexively as the student council president adjusted her glasses pointedly. Tell me truthfully, Amiya Shirou-kun, are you, or are you not, a magician? I'm not. Shirou answered promptly, only to shiver in the face of the bespectacled girl's frown to elaborate. I'm merely an apprentice magus, and a rather poor one at that. If you wanted my official classification, it'd probably be spellcaster or faker. Aren't those all the same thing? Rias pondered, tilting her head in confusion, a sentiment shared by Asia and Issei, who actually stopped glaring at the faker to blink at the redhead in confusion. To anyone not in the know, there's very little difference between them. Shirou admitted with a nod. However, there are actually several classifications a magus can fall under, with the title of magician being the absolute pinnacle one can achieve. I'd always wondered just what kind of hierarchical structure the human magical societies possessed. Sana opined, her expression lined with intrigue. I assume that spellcaster holds some special meaning. It essentially refers to those like myself with relatively low skills in magecraft who don't adhere to the ways of traditional magi. Shirou explained, waving a hand to the kitchenette for emphasis. For example, I'm quite at home with most modern appliances, whereas most true magi would consider using a typewriter instead of pen and paper, or even parchment, to be heresy. I see. Sana noted, even as the rest of the group, Rias included, grimaced at the idea of being denied modern comforts such as running hot water or mobile phones. And just what must one do to be classified as a full-fledged magician? Only those who discover and are capable of wielding a true magic can be called a magician. Shirou replied promptly. From what I've learned under my mentors, there have only been 5 people worthy of being called magician in human history. What precisely do you mean by true magic? Sana inquired, her expression intrigued. And how can there only be 5 when I know for a fact there are entire schools dedicated to various arcane fields? It's complicated. Shirou admitted with a grimace, holding up a hand at Sana's frown. Like I said, I'm only an apprentice magus, and a third-rate one at that. He sighed as she calmed down. Let's see, I suppose the easiest way to explain the difference is that, unlike magecraft, the effects of a true magic cannot be replicated by modern technology. I think I can see where you're coming from. Rias concurred, her expression thoughtful as Tsubaki and Akeno returned with a tray laden with a tea set and elegantly arranged daifuku on a plate. Anyone with a match can set something on fire, and certain branches like alchemy do share some elements with modern science. Hundreds of years ago, the ability to fly or talk to someone across long distances would have been seen as magic. Shirou concurred with a nod. Nowadays anyone can do either provided they have the time, effort, and money to spare. It certainly makes more sense the more I think of it. Sana noted, inclining her head in approval, though her expression never changed. Should we therefore assume that your title as faker pertains to your school of thaumaturgy in some way? It's a title used to refer to a magus that's proficient in the use of gradation air. Shirou confirmed, only to sigh at their blank expressions, holding up his hand and tracing a copy of one of the teacups Tsubaki had set before him for all to see. Basically it allows the user to materialize objects out of thin air in accordance to their imagination and skill level. Fascinating. Rias noted, her eyes, and those of Sana glittering as they no doubt considered the possibilities such a skill could provide and jumped to the wrong conclusions like many before them. I take it such a skill must be rather valuable. On the contrary, most magi consider gradation air to be a waste of time. Shirou admitted, allowing the cup to vanish in a burst of prana. For example, say that I needed a specific dagger for a ritual. While I could make a dagger similar to what I need, due to the inherent flaw in human imagination, it wouldn't be a perfect match and would vanish should my concentration waver for a second. What the hell? Saji chuckled, the blonde student council member shaking his head in amusement as he smirked at the faker teasingly. You sure picked a lousy school to specialize in, Amiya. I wasn't really given much of a choice. Shirou admitted with a shrug, more than used to such comments after Rin's not-so-gentle ribbing. Due to my situation, I was ill-suited for traditional magecraft and my first mentor admitted he wasn't much of a magus, to the point it was all those who came after could do to make me somewhat competent. He smiled self-deprecatingly. Truth be told, I wouldn't be surprised if I never graduated beyond apprentice magus. And yet, Sana cut in, her expression serious once more. Not only did you manage to drive off a rogue exorcist of the church, an established prodigy no less, but you even managed to destroy the holy sword he was wielding at the time. Thank you for that, by the way. Rias offered honestly, her smile grateful even as she sat beside the uncompromising Sana. You've no idea how worried I was when Kiba told me what happened. I'm just glad he was alright. It looked like that cut he received took a lot out of him. Shirou admitted, inclining his head in acknowledgement of her thanks. Although, I have to ask, why did the sword react to him like that? He had his suspicions, how could he not after adding Rapidly's history to his inner world? But he'd rather hear it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, and it was about time they started answering some of his questions. Damn it.